I need the deposit for the construction materials, babe. Just 50,000. I'll pay you back when the contract payment comes through next month. Those words should have been my first warning. But I was in love, planning our wedding, trusting completely. I transferred the money without hesitation. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, my fiancé, Damien, had become a stranger. His calls became shorter, less frequent. His texts turned brief and dismissive. He stopped coming by my apartment, always citing work emergencies or project deadlines. Yesterday, he'd stopped answering completely. I sat in my living room, staring at my phone, watching another call go straight to voicemail. Around me were wedding magazines, venue brochures, and a detailed budget spreadsheet. Our wedding was 4 months away. 200 guests invited. Deposits paid on the venue, catering, photographer. My best friend Lorna had warned me. Don't mix money with relationships before marriage, especially not that much money. I dismissed her concerns. Damien was a contractor with his own business. He'd shown me the contract, a major commercial renovation worth $200,000. He just needed cash flow for materials until the client's first payment cleared. What I didn't know was that I'd just funded something very different from construction materials. My name is Lilian Daniels, and at 34, I thought I'd finally found my person. Damien Torres had swept into my life 18 months ago with his confident smile, ambitious plans, and seemingly successful contracting business. I was a senior accountant at Riverside Financial Group, making good money, living independently in a nice apartment downtown. After 2 failed relationships in my 20s, I'd focused on building my career and financial security. Damien seemed perfect. He owned his contracting company, drove a nice truck, talked confidently about future projects and business expansion. He was charming, attentive, and eager to build a life together. We'd gotten engaged 6 months ago, a beautiful proposal at the restaurant where we'd had our first date. I'd cried happy tears, immediately starting to plan our dream wedding. His business always seemed slightly chaotic, delayed payments from clients, unexpected expenses, cash flow problems, but he handled everything with confident reassurance. That's just construction, babe. Everyone pays eventually. I'd believed him completely. Now, sitting with my phone showing 17 unanswered calls, I felt the first cold fingers of doubt creeping in. Something was very wrong. I called Lorna, my voice shaking. He's not answering. It's been 2 days. His phone goes straight to voicemail. Have you driven by his place? She asked immediately. Not yet. I didn't want to seem desperate or controlling. Lilian, you gave him $50,000. You have every right to seem desperate. Go to his apartment right now. She was right. I grabbed my keys, my hands trembling slightly as I drove across town to Damien's apartment complex. His truck wasn't in its usual parking spot. That was the first sign. I knocked on his door. No answer. I knocked harder, calling his name. A neighbor opened her door, giving me a curious look. Looking for Damien, she asked. Yes, have you seen him? She hesitated. He moved out, maybe 5 days ago, had a moving truck and everything, cleared out completely. The ground seemed to shift beneath my feet. Moved out, are you sure? Positive. I helped him carry a box to the truck. He said he was relocating for a big project. I thanked her mechanically and walked back to my car in a daze. Moved out. 5 days ago, right after receiving my $50,000. And he'd never mentioned it. I drove straight to his business office, a small space in an industrial complex where he'd said Torres Contracting was headquartered. My heart pounded as I pulled into the parking lot. The office was dark, completely empty. I cupped my hands against the window, peering inside. Nothing. No furniture, no equipment, no signs anyone had ever worked there. A man emerged from the neighboring unit, carrying tools to his truck. Help you with something. I'm looking for Torres Contracting, the business that was here. He scratched his head. That guy he cleared out last week, broke his lease actually, owner wasn't happy. Do you know where he went? No idea. But he was in a hurry. Left in the middle of the night, didn't even clean up properly. I leaned against my car, feeling sick. This wasn't a business relocation. This was running. Damien had taken my $50,000 and disappeared. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Stop calling, I need space, the wedding is off." That was it. No explanation, no apology, no mention of my money. Just a cold dismissal via text from a number I didn't recognize. I stared at the message, rage slowly replacing shock. He thought this was over. He thought he'd won. He had no idea what was coming. I didn't cry. That surprised me. Instead, I felt a cold clarity settling over me as I drove home. My accounting brain kicked into gear, analyzing the situation like a financial statement. Damien had systematically planned this. The timing was too perfect. The business closure, the apartment move, the sudden communication cutoff, all coordinated within days of receiving my money. This wasn't impulse. This was a con. Back at my apartment, I opened my laptop and started documenting everything. Every text message, every email, every receipt. I'd been meticulous about tracking wedding expenses, never imagining I'd need evidence for something like this. I pulled up the bank transfer confirmation. $50,000 to Damien's business account, with the memo, construction materials deposit loan. Loan. I'd been smart enough to label it that way, thank goodness. Then I started searching online. Damien Tours contractor, Tours contracting reviews, Damien Tours fraud. Nothing came up immediately, but I kept digging. I searched public records, business registrations, contractor licensing databases. Tours contracting wasn't licensed, had never been properly licensed in our state. My hands clenched into fists. How had I missed this? Because I'd trusted him. Because I'd been blinded by love and wedding planning and the future we'd supposedly been building together. That trust was about to become his biggest mistake. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out my next move. Lorna came over with coffee and bagels. She took one look at my face and knew. He ran, she said flatly. Completely, moved out of his apartment, closed his office, disappeared. Sent me a text breaking off the wedding from a new number. And your $50,000. Gone. Lorna's face hardened. We're going to the police. I already checked. It's a civil matter unless I can prove fraud. And proving fraud means proving he never intended to repay me. He closed his business and disappeared right after getting your money. That's pretty clear intent. But his text just said the wedding is off, not that he's keeping the money. Legally, it gets complicated. Lorna shook her head in disgust. So what are you going to do? I smiled slowly. Something he won't expect. I'm going to find him, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what he did. How? I'm an accountant, Lorna. I find money for a living. I trace transactions, identify patterns, follow paper trails. And Damien just made the mistake of stealing from someone who knows exactly how to track him down. She grinned. Now that's the Lilian I know. I started with his phone number. The old one that now went to voicemail, and the new one he'd texted from. I ran both through every reverse lookup service I could find. The old number was disconnected. The new one was a prepaid phone, untraceable directly, but it gave me a data point. Next, I checked his social media. He'd deleted his accounts, all of them. Instagram, where he'd posted project photos, the business page on various platforms, even his personal profiles were gone. But the internet never truly forgets. I used cached pages and archives to recover deleted posts. Photos of job sites, client projects, his truck. I started contacting people who'd commented on his posts, asking if they knew how to reach him. Most didn't respond, but one woman did. "Are you another one?" she wrote back. "Because he owes me money too. Took a deposit for a kitchen renovation that never happened." My pulse quickened. How much? 12,000. I've been trying to find him for 2 months. I asked for her contact information. We arranged to talk that evening. Her name was Simone Fletcher. When we spoke, she sounded exhausted and defeated. "I should have known," she said. "The red flags were there, but he was so convincing. Showed me other projects, had professional-looking contracts, seemed completely legitimate." "Did you report it?" "To everyone. Police, Better Business Bureau, everywhere. Nothing's happened." "What if we work together?" I suggested. "Pooled information found him together." She paused. "You think we can?" "I know we can." Over the next week, I found 3 more victims, all women, all between ages 30 and 45. All had given Damien money for various contracting projects or personal loans. The amounts varied: $8,000, $15,000, $23,000. Combined with my $50,000 and Simone's $12,000, he'd stolen over $100,000 from 5 women in the past year. We created a group chat. The 5 of us compared notes, shared information, built a timeline of his movements. A pattern emerged. Damien would date women for several months, establish trust, then create an urgent financial need. Business emergencies, contract deposits, investment opportunities, always with promises of quick repayment. Then he'd disappear. "He's a romance scammer," one woman, Bridget, said during our video call. "That's the official term. They build romantic relationships specifically to steal money." "Has anyone successfully tracked him down?" I asked. "Not that I've found. He's good at disappearing." But I'd noticed something in the archived photos. In the background of several job site pictures, there was a property that appeared multiple times. A house under renovation with distinctive blue shutters and a specific architectural style. "Does anyone recognize this house?" I asked, sharing the screenshot. Simone gasped. "That's in Oakdale Heights. I know that neighborhood. My sister lives there." Finally, a geographic clue. I drove to Oakdale Heights that weekend, systematically cruising streets until I found the house from the photos. It had been completed since Damien's pictures. New siding, landscaping, but the distinctive architecture matched. I knocked on the door. A middle-aged man answered, looking confused. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for information about the contractor who worked on your renovation. Damien Tours." His expression darkened immediately. "That con artist, what about him?" My heart raced. "He took money from me too. I'm trying to find him." The man, whose name was Felix, invited me inside. Over coffee, he explained that Damien had been the subcontractor for his renovation 2 years ago. He'd done mediocre work, overcharged for materials, and disappeared before finishing several rooms. "I found out later he'd never been properly licensed," Felix said. "The general contractor had to eat the cost and hire someone else to fix his mistakes." "Do you have any contact information for him? Anything that might help me track him down?" Felix thought for a moment. He had a truck with his company name on it, but there was something else. He mentioned having a storage unit where he kept equipment, said it was cheaper than renting warehouse space. "Did he say where?" "Somewhere on the east side, I think, near the industrial park." It wasn't much, but it was something. I spent the next 2 days calling every storage facility on the east side. On my 16th call, I hit gold. "Tours, yeah, he's got a unit here," the facility manager said. "Though his rental is 3 weeks overdue, we're about to auction his stuff." "Would it be possible to see what's in the unit? I'm trying to collect on a debt." The manager hesitated. "I can't let you into his unit, but I can tell you that we're conducting an auction next week for delinquent rentals. His unit is one of them. Everything inside gets sold to recover our costs." "Can anyone attend the auction?" "Sure, it's public, next Saturday at 10. I marked my calendar, then called the other women. "I found something. We need to be at this auction." On Saturday, all 5 of us showed up at the storage facility. The manager seemed surprised to see a group of determined women waiting at the gates. The auction was strange, various units being opened, their contents displayed for buyers who bid on the entire unit site unseen, except for what they could see from the doorway. When they opened Damien's unit, I recognized his tools immediately. But there was more, boxes of documents, a filing cabinet, a laptop case. "Do I hear $25? The auctioneer began. "500, I called out immediately. People turned to stare. 500 was absurdly high for a unit of old tools and random boxes. 500 going once, twice, sold. We loaded everything from Damien's storage unit into a rental truck. Back at my apartment, the five of us spent hours going through every box, every file, every document. What we found was shocking. Damien had kept records of everything: contracts with fake letterhead, templates for creating official-looking business documents, lists of marks, that's what he called us, with notes about our financial situations, vulnerabilities, and how much he thought he could get from each. "Listen to this," Bridget said, reading from a notebook. "Lilian Daniels, accountant, financially stable, wants marriage and family, desperate enough to overlook red flags. Target amount, 50,000. Approach, business loan for wedding expenses." My face burned with humiliation and rage. He'd calculated everything. But there was more. The laptop, when we managed to access it using a password written carelessly on a sticky note, contained email chains with other women, current targets he was cultivating. "He's doing this right now," Simone whispered, "to other women." We found bank statements too, multiple accounts under different names. Transaction records showing deposits and transfers that matched the amounts he'd stolen from us. And then we found his address. His real address, not the apartment he'd pretended to live in. A house 30 miles away in a suburb called Riverside Meadows. He's been living there the whole time, I realized. The apartment was just for show, to keep his marks from knowing where he actually lived. "So what do we do now?" one of the women asked. I smiled grimly. "Now we take back control." Monday morning, I didn't go to work. Instead, I went to a lawyer specializing in fraud cases. I brought 3 boxes of evidence. The attorney, a sharp woman named Colette Brennan, reviewed everything with increasing interest. "This is extensive documentation," she said. "He kept records of his own crimes. That's unusual and incredibly helpful." "Can we prosecute?" "Criminally, maybe. You'd need to get the district attorney interested. But civilly, absolutely. With this evidence, you have a clear case for fraud, intentional misrepresentation, and breach of contract." "What about the other women? Can we file together?" "A class action would be possible, but it might be more effective to file multiple individual suits. Overwhelm him from several directions at once." I liked the sound of that. "There's something else," Colette continued. "If he's actively running this con on other women right now, there might be criminal interest. Let me make some calls to a contact at the DA's office." Over the next week, things moved quickly. Colette contacted the district attorney's office. A detective named Ramona Cruz took interest in the case, especially the evidence showing active fraud. "We've been looking for someone like this," Detective Cruz said during our meeting. "Romance fraud is increasing, but victims rarely have this much evidence. Most feel too embarrassed to come forward." "What happens next?" I asked. "We investigate, possibly set up surveillance. If we can catch him in the act with current victims, we can build a criminal case." "How long will that take?" "Could be weeks, could be months." I shook my head. "I have a faster idea." The plan was simple but required coordination. We'd confront Damien publicly, document everything, and make sure his future victims could find the truth about him easily. First, I created a website. Damien Torres Scam.com laid out the entire story with evidence, court documents, photos, and testimonials from all 5 victims. I made sure it was SEO optimized. Anyone searching his name would find it immediately. Then we contacted local news stations. 3 stations expressed interest in the story, particularly because we had extensive documentation and multiple victims willing to speak on camera. One investigative reporter, Carlton Hayes from Channel 7 News, was especially interested. "We've done pieces on romance fraud before, But having this much evidence and multiple victims willing to go on record, that's rare. When can we start filming? Soon, I said. But first, we need to get it on camera confronting him. Carlton's eyes lit up. A confrontation, with cameras rolling. Exactly. Using the address from his storage unit documents, we confirmed that Damien was living in the Riverside Meadows house. Detective Cruz had conducted surveillance and confirmed his presence there. We can't stop you from confronting him, she said carefully. But be safe, and if he threatens you, call immediately. We planned the confrontation for a Saturday morning. All 5 victims would attend, along with Carlton and his camera crew. As we finalized details, I felt a grim satisfaction. Damien had spent months manipulating us, making us feel foolish and desperate. Now we'd see how he handled being exposed. Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather. Clear skies, good lighting for cameras. Carlton and his crew set up discreetly down the street from Damien's house. The 5 of us approached together, our phones recording as backup to Carlton's professional equipment. I knocked firmly on the door. Footsteps inside, the door opened. Damien stood there, coffee mug in hand, looking relaxed and comfortable. When he saw us, his face went pale. What are you doing here? Hello, Damien, I said calmly. Or should we call you by one of your other names, the ones you used for your fake bank accounts? He tried to close the door. Bridget blocked it with her foot. You took $50,000 from me, I continued. $12,000 from Simone, $15,000 from Bridget, $8,000 from Cassandra, $23,000 from Meredith. Over $100,000 total from 5 women you manipulated and lied to. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered, but his eyes darted nervously toward the street where Carlton's camera was clearly visible. We found your storage unit, Simone said. All your records, the lists of targets, the fake contracts, the notebooks where you planned out each con. We've already filed fraud charges, Bridget added. The police are investigating, but we wanted to give you a chance to do the right thing. He finally noticed the camera. You're filming this. This is harassment. No, I replied. This is justice. Damien tried to shut the door, but we'd already gotten what we needed. Carlton had everything on camera, Damien's panicked reaction, his inability to deny the charges, his obvious guilt. But I wasn't finished. The easy way is to return the money and turn yourself in, I called through the closed door. The hard way is what happens when this story airs on the evening news tonight, when your website goes live, when every woman in this city knows your face and your methods. Silence from inside. You have until 5 o'clock to contact my attorney, I continued, sliding my card under his door. After that, everything goes public. We walked back to our cars. Carlton was grinning. This is going to be a fantastic story, he said. We'll air it tonight at 6 and 11, and I'll make sure it gets picked up by the network affiliates. Thank you, I said. Back home, I finalized the website and prepared to launch it the moment Carlton's story aired. I'd also created social media accounts dedicated to exposing Damien's fraud, with links to all the evidence. At 5:30, my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello. Lilian, it's Damien. His voice was different now, small, defeated. We need to talk. Talk to my attorney. You have her information. Please just listen. I can explain everything. There were circumstances. The only thing I want to hear is that you're returning every dollar you stole. Otherwise, turn on Channel 7 News in 30 minutes. I hung up. At 6 o'clock sharp, Carlton's story aired. The news segment was devastating. Carlton had done thorough research, interviewing all 5 of us, showing the evidence from Damien's storage unit, even pulling public records that showed his business had never been properly licensed. Damien Tours has left a trail of broken hearts and empty bank accounts, Carlton narrated over footage of Damien's house. Operating under the guise of a legitimate contractor and loving fiancé, he systematically defrauded at least 5 women we know of, possibly more. The segment included our confrontation footage. Damien's panicked face filled the screen as I listed the amounts he'd stolen. Then came our interviews, each woman telling her story, showing the text messages, the false promises, the sudden disappearances. "I thought he loved me," Simone said, tears in her eyes. "I thought we were building a future together. Instead, he was just calculating how much he could take." Carlton concluded with a warning. "If you've been contacted by Damien Torres, or if you've given him money, police ask that you come forward. There may be many more victims who haven't yet realized they've been conned." My phone exploded with notifications. The website went live simultaneously. Within an hour, Damien Torres' scam.com had 3,000 visitors. And the comments started rolling in. "This happened to me too. He approached me 6 months ago with the same story. I gave him $7,000. How do I join your lawsuit?" We'd found 7 more victims by midnight. The story went viral overnight. Local news became regional, then national. Major outlets picked it up, a romance fraud case with unprecedented documentation and victims willing to speak publicly. By Monday morning, 14 women had come forward. The total stolen amount exceeded $200,000. Detective Cruz called. "The district attorney wants to prosecute. We have enough evidence for fraud, identity theft, and theft by deception charges. Multiple counts." "When?" "We're preparing the arrest warrant now. Should be executed within 48 hours. My attorney called next. "We've filed a civil suit on behalf of all 14 victims. Class action, nomming Damien and his various shell companies. The evidence is overwhelming." But the real victory came Tuesday afternoon. Carlton called, excited. "Lilian, turn on the news, any channel." I switched on the television to see breaking news coverage. Local con artist arrested following multi-state investigation into romance fraud scheme. The footage showed police leading Damien out of his house in handcuffs. He looked haggard, defeated, nothing like the confident charmer who'd swept me off my feet. Following an investigation triggered by victims coming forward after a local news report, the anchor explained, police have arrested Damien Torres on multiple fraud charges. Investigators say he may have victimized dozens of women across 3 states over the past 5 years. 3 states, dozens of women, the scope was staggering. My phone rang constantly. Other news outlets wanting interviews. Women from other cities sharing their experiences. Lawyers offering to help with the civil case. The story had become bigger than I'd imagined. The preliminary hearing happened 2 weeks later. I attended with the other victims, all of us wanting to see Damien face consequences. He looked different in court, smaller somehow, without his confident swagger. His public defender looked overwhelmed by the mountain of evidence. The prosecutor laid out the case methodically. 14 confirmed victims, over $200,000 stolen, evidence of systematic fraud spanning 5 years and 3 states. "Your Honor, the defendant kept detailed records of his crimes," the prosecutor explained, "including lists of targets, calculated amounts to extract, and strategies for manipulation. This wasn't impulse. This was calculated, premeditated fraud conducted repeatedly." Damien's lawyer tried to argue for bail reduction. "My client has ties to the community." "Your client has proven ties to elaborate deception," the judge interrupted. "He maintained multiple residences under different identities, operated fake businesses, and fled from previous investigations. Bail is denied." Damien would remain in custody until trial. Outside the courthouse, Carlton interviewed several of us for a follow-up story. "How does it feel to see him arrested?" he asked me. I considered the question carefully. It feels like justice, but more than that, it feels like taking back power. He made us feel foolish, desperate, ashamed. Now everyone knows the truth. He's the criminal, not us. That evening, I checked the website. Over 50,000 visitors now. The story had been shared hundreds of thousands of times on social media. And 17 more women had come forward. The trial took place 4 months later. By then, 23 victims had joined the case. The total stolen amount exceeded $300,000. The courtroom was packed. Victims filled the gallery, along with reporters, legal observers, and advocates for fraud victims. Damien sat at the defense table, expressionless. His lawyer had advised him to take a plea deal, but he'd refused, insisting he'd done nothing wrong. The prosecution called victim after victim to the stand. Each woman told her story, how they'd met Damien, how he'd gained their trust, how he'd manufactured financial emergencies, how he'd disappeared after receiving money. The pattern was undeniable. When I took the stand, I looked directly at Damien. He showed me contracts, business documents, evidence of a successful company, I testified. Everything was fake. He created an entire false identity to manipulate me into trusting him with $50,000. And when you tried to contact him after the money was transferred, the prosecutor asked. He disappeared, changed his number, moved out of his apartment, closed his fake business. When he finally contacted me, it was only to break off our engagement via text message. No explanation, no apology, no mention of returning my money. What impact has this had on you? I paused, gathering my thoughts. Beyond the financial loss, it destroyed my ability to trust. It made me question my own judgment. For months, I felt stupid and ashamed. Until I realized that being a victim of fraud doesn't make me foolish. It makes him a criminal. The defense tried to argue that the relationships had been real, that the money transfers were gifts, that any business failures were legitimate losses, not fraud. But the evidence was overwhelming. The prosecution presented Damien's own notebooks, where he'd written detailed plans for each con, the fake business documents, the multiple identities, the pattern of behavior across years and states. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Fraud, identity theft, theft by deception, 23 counts in total. The courtroom erupted in relief and tears. Women who'd felt isolated and ashamed now watched their abuser being held accountable. At sentencing 2 weeks later, the judge was stern. Mr. Torres, you systematically exploited vulnerable people seeking love and connection. You manipulated their emotions to steal their money. You showed no remorse and continued your schemes even after victims started coming forward. Damien finally spoke, his voice quiet. I never meant to hurt anyone. Yet you did, the judge replied. Repeatedly and deliberately. This court sentences you to 12 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. Additionally, you are ordered to pay full restitution to all victims. 12 years. It wouldn't fully compensate for the damage he'd caused, but it was justice. Outside the courthouse, all 23 victims gathered for a group photo. We'd started as isolated targets of a con artist. Now we were united survivors who'd brought a criminal to justice. The civil case moved faster with Damien's criminal conviction. His assets were seized, the house in Riverside Meadows, several bank accounts, a boat he'd purchased with stolen money. Everything was liquidated to pay restitution. My $50,000 came back in full, along with interest and legal fees. The other victims received their money back too. But the financial recovery wasn't the most important outcome. Carlton's original story had sparked a national conversation about romance fraud. Other news outlets started investigating similar cases. Law enforcement agencies began taking these crimes more seriously. I was invited to speak at a fraud prevention conference. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of law enforcement officials, victim advocates, and financial professionals, I shared my story. Romance fraud thrives in silence, I explained. Victims feel ashamed, so they don't report. That shame allows criminals to continue operating. Breaking that silence, refusing to feel embarrassed about being victimized, that's how we stop them. After the conference, multiple women approached me asking how they could tell if they were being targeted. I realized there was a need for education and support. With Simone and Bridget, I started a nonprofit organization called Fraud Alert Network. We created resources for identifying romance scams, supporting victims, and working with law enforcement to prosecute offenders. Within 6 months, we'd helped identify 12 active scammers and connected over 40 victims with legal and emotional support. A year after Damien's sentencing, I stood in a television studio preparing for a different kind of interview. A national morning show wanted to discuss romance fraud and how victims could protect themselves. "You've become quite the advocate," the host said warmly during commercial break. "How did that happen?" "I refuse to be defined by what happened to me," I replied. "Damien wanted me to feel small and ashamed. Instead, I chose to speak up, seek justice, and help others." During the interview, I shared practical advice. Trust your instincts. Verify business licenses and credentials. Never send money to someone you haven't met in person. Keep detailed records of all financial transactions. Don't let embarrassment prevent you from reporting fraud. The segment included updates on Damien's case and featured several other victims sharing their stories. After the show aired, Fraud Alert Network's website crashed from traffic. Hundreds of people reached out seeking help or sharing their experiences. My personal life had changed too. I'd started dating again, cautiously but optimistically. I'd learned to trust my judgment while also protecting myself. Red flags I'd once ignored now prompted immediate questions. Lorna had been right all along about mixing money with relationships. But more than that, she taught me the importance of having people in your life who tell you the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. The wedding I'd planned never happened. The deposits I'd paid for venue and catering were lost. But I'd gained something more valuable: strength, purpose, and the knowledge that I could survive and thrive after betrayal. 2 years after the confrontation at Damien's house, I received an unexpected letter. Prison mail from Damien himself. I debated opening it. What could he possibly have to say? Finally, curiosity won. "Lilian," the letter began, "I know you have no reason to read this or believe anything I say, but I wanted you to know that I'm genuinely sorry for what I did to you and the others. Prison has given me time to think about who I became and why. I told myself I was just taking advantage of opportunities, that everyone involved was willing. I didn't acknowledge the manipulation and lies. You were right to expose me. The shame I felt when that news story aired was the first time I'd felt genuine consequences for my actions. That confrontation, as angry as it made me, was what I needed. I'm using my time here to work with programs teaching prisoners about financial literacy and healthy relationships. Ironic, I know, but maybe I can prevent others from making my mistakes. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that your courage to speak up changed not just your life, but mine too, and hopefully prevented others from becoming victims. I hope you found peace and happiness. You deserve both. Damien." I read the letter twice, trying to determine if it was genuine or another manipulation. I showed the letter to my therapist during our next session. After Damien's arrest, I'd started counseling to process the betrayal and rebuild my trust. "What do you think?" she asked. "Is he sincere?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to believe people can change, but he was so skilled at manipulation. How do I know this isn't another con?" "Does it matter? Whether he's changed or not, you've already moved forward. His remorse or lack of it doesn't define your healing." She was right. Damien's journey wasn't my concern anymore. I wrote a brief response. "Damien, I received your letter. I hope you're sincere about changing. But my healing doesn't depend on your redemption. I've already found peace by choosing to speak up and help others. Take care of yourself." I sent it and felt a weight lift. That chapter was truly closed. Meanwhile, Fraud Alert Network continued growing. We'd helped over 200 victims, worked with law enforcement in 15 states, and contributed to 6 successful prosecutions. The organization had become my purpose, transforming personal pain into community protection. I'd also been promoted at work. My boss had noticed how organized and detail-oriented I'd been throughout the legal process. You handled an incredibly difficult situation with remarkable professionalism, she'd said. That's the kind of leadership we value. The promotion came with a substantial raise, which I used partly to fund Fraud Alert Network's expansion. My personal life had also flourished. I was dating someone new, a genuinely kind man named Wesley who worked as a teacher. He'd been patient with my cautiousness, understanding when I needed to verify details or asked questions about his background. I respect that you protect yourself, he'd said when I explained my history. That's not distrust, that's wisdom. Our relationship moved slowly, built on honest communication and mutual respect. No grand romantic gestures or urgent financial needs, just steady, genuine connection. Lorna had become like family, always there through every step of my journey. She'd helped run Fraud Alert Network's social media, spreading awareness and connecting victims with resources. Remember when I warned you about lending him money? She teased one evening over dinner. You were absolutely right. I should have listened. But if you had, none of this would have happened. The organization, the advocacy, helping all those people, that came from what you went through. She had a point. Sometimes our worst experiences lead to our greatest purpose. 3 years after that devastating text message ending our engagement, I stood at a podium addressing a national conference on financial fraud prevention. Law enforcement officials, victim advocates, and financial professionals filled the auditorium. When Damien Torres disappeared with my $50,000, I had a choice, I told the audience. I could accept the loss, feel ashamed, and move on quietly, or I could fight back. The screen behind me showed before and after photos. Before, me in my apartment, surrounded by wedding planning materials, naive and trusting. After, me standing with 23 other victims outside the courthouse after Damien's conviction. Fighting back meant refusing shame. It meant documenting everything, finding other victims, going public with our stories. It meant turning personal pain into community protection. I clicked to the next slide, showing Fraud Alert Network's impact statistics. Over 500 victims helped, 18 successful prosecutions, partnerships with law enforcement in 23 states. Romance fraud works because of silence and shame. Victims feel too embarrassed to report. That isolation allows criminals to continue operating. But when we speak up, when we share our stories, when we refuse to be defined by what happened to us, that's when we create change. The audience applauded as I finished. Afterward, dozens of people approached with questions, stories, requests for resources. One woman, probably in her 60s, took my hand with tears in her eyes. My daughter was scammed last year. She was so ashamed she didn't tell anyone until she'd lost everything. Your story gave her courage to report it. They arrested the man last month. Thank you. Those moments made everything worthwhile. That evening, I had dinner with Wesley at our favorite restaurant. We'd been dating for 18 months now, taking things slow, building something real. You know what I realized today? I said, watching him across the table. Damien thought he was taking something from me, but really he gave me something, purpose, strength, a mission that matters. Wesley smiled. That's because you chose to transform the experience instead of being destroyed by it. He was right. The engagement that ended in betrayal had led me to something better than I'd imagined. Not just a relationship, but a life built on authenticity, advocacy, and genuine connection. My phone buzzed with an email notification. Another woman reaching out through Fraud Alert Network's website, sharing her story, asking for help. I'd respond tomorrow, connecting her with resources, supporting her through the reporting process, reminding her that being victimized wasn't her fault. Because that's what Damien had inadvertently taught me. When someone tries to make you feel small, powerless, and ashamed, you have two choices. You can believe them and shrink, or you can stand up, speak out, and prove them catastrophically wrong. I'd chosen the second option, and in doing so, I'd found not just justice, but purpose. The $50,000 Damien stole had come back with interest. But more valuable than the money was what I'd gained, the knowledge that I could face betrayal, fight back, and emerge stronger. That confidence was worth far more than any amount he could have taken. As Wesley and I left the restaurant, walking hand in hand into the evening, I felt genuine peace. The woman who'd sat alone in her apartment 3 years ago, staring at unanswered calls from her vanished fiancé, would barely recognize who I'd become. Damien had thought he'd won when he disappeared with my money. He'd thought I'd be too ashamed, too defeated, too broken to fight back. He'd been wrong about everything. And that miscalculation had cost him 12 years of freedom, his reputation, and any future ability to con vulnerable women. Meanwhile, I'd built something meaningful from the ashes of his betrayal, an organization helping hundreds of people, a platform for advocacy and education, a life defined not by what was taken from me, but by what I'd created in response. That's the thing about trying to destroy someone. Sometimes you just give them the fuel they need to become unstoppable. I smiled at the thought, squeezing Wesley's hand as we walked into our future. A future built not on deception and manipulation, but on truth, trust, and the hard-won wisdom that comes from surviving betrayal and choosing to thrive anyway. Damien had changed after taking my deposit. He'd stopped answering my calls, thinking he'd gotten away with everything. But I'd changed too, just not in the way he'd expected. And my transformation had consequences he never saw coming.